Welcome everyone to Teaching Artist Tuesdays 2026. This is our second installment of the series this year. I hope you were able to join us last week. But if not, we're here tonight and we have one more session next week. This session of the series is a panel. Tonight we have Practice What You Teach, Sustaining Your Artistry as a Teaching Artist. We're very thrilled to have you all here. My name is Kinsey. I'm the programs director here at the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. The Roundtable is a grassroots service organization that works to improve and advance the state of arts education. We do that in many ways, one of which is professional development, workshops, and series like this, advocacy work, re-granting, and just trying to bring folks together, share resources, and all of that good stuff across the arts education field. Although we are meeting tonight online via Zoom, the round table would like to acknowledge that we do work and live on unceded lands. Mannahatta, or the place also widely known as New York City, exists on the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, and Wappinger people. These sovereign nations and communities are still thriving here, and we continue to occupy their lands. So we would like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and Brown and immigrant communities, which have helped build the city that we know and love today, and continue to do so. As we recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined, I'm just once more going to uplift a handful of contemporary Indigenous arts organizations that the Roundtable is aware of, that we feel that we can all learn from and hopefully support. If you haven't before, please save these links, check out these organizations, support them with donations if you can. And I also invite you, if you know of any organizations that you would like to share in the chat as well, to do that at any time during the call today. Thank you. Just a few reminders, if you're having trouble with Zoom, please do send me a private message. I am here to help. Please make sure during tonight's session that you keep your mic on mute unless you are the person speaking so we can hear our panelists clearly. We encourage you to use the chat to connect with other folks on the call. Please feel free to introduce yourselves now and share where you're calling in from. You can also put your questions in there and we will collect them. We'll save some time at the end of today's session for some Q&A. Also, this call does include automated captions via Zoom. So if you would like to have closed captioning, you can navigate to your toolbar. It may be under the More section, select Captions, Show Captions, and they should start populating for you automatically. And last, this session is being recorded and will be made available to registrants following the conclusion of the series, which will end next week. So look out for that link with tons of other resources and things in a follow-up email from me after the series ends. And I think that's enough from me. Now I'm very, very excited to welcome our moderator for tonight's conversation, Leah Reddy. Leah is a master teaching artist, a friend of the Roundtable, is also a co-chair of the Teaching Artist Affairs Committee here at the Roundtable. So thank you so much, Leah, for being here tonight and moderating this conversation for us.
Thank you, Kinsey. Can everyone hear me? Amazing, thank you. I want to take a moment as we get started just to introduce our three fantastic panelists. I was so impressed with our sort of pre-show conversation last week, and I just want to give you a little bit of insight into who they are before we launch into their wisdom. So we're going in alphabetical order, just so everyone's clear. There's no sense of hierarchy here. I just went with the alphabet. Natie Barret-Mas is a musician and curator from La Réunion, or Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean. She's been based in Brooklyn since 2014. She uses a looper, violin, and vocals to build full tracks live. And she's toured the world with Beyonce and Jay-Z, collaborated with many others, and has 2 EPs out and is working on a new project. She currently curates Creole Fest, a celebration of Creole cultures. Please join me in silent applause. Welcome to Natie. We're going to move on to Barbara Ellmann. Barbara is a visual artist and, I learned, former dancer, whose paintings are primarily about memory and place. She has been chosen for residencies around the globe and has produced public works for the MTA. She has work in the J&Z station at the Van Sicklen line and the Cambria Heights branch of the Queens Public Library. She co founded the New York Artists Circle, a mutual support group for professional artists that now has over 500 members and served as the group's director from 1996 to 2015. I am mostly going to let these folks talk about their teaching practice themselves, but I do want to highlight that Barbara has been a teaching artist since 1980. So she's a true pioneer in our field, and we owe much to the work of her and her peers. And finally, Clement Mensah. Oh, wait, I forgot. Silent applause for Barbara, please. Yes. Clement Mensah was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa, and moved to the Netherlands at the age of 11. After earning his BFA in Amsterdam, he became an exchange student at the Ailey School, where he apprenticed with Bill T. Jones and the Arnie Zane Dance Company. Since then, he's danced with so many companies I cannot possibly list them all, earned an MA in dance performance, and taught dance in over 40 countries. He is the founder of TIKoRO Arts, which offers dance and drumming programs in the New York City public schools. So please join me in silent applause for Clement Mensah. And now that I've introduced you to the panelists, we're going to take a minute to get to know you and how you're feeling about the intersection of your artistic practice and your teaching artistry. So Kinsey is going to deploy yes, we've got it. Look at this. This is a live poll. It's going to make a word cloud. It's an anonymous word cloud. She has put the link to it in the chat. And if you could just go to that link or scan this QR code and enter one word to describe the relationship between your teaching and artistic practices. Some really great overlapping words here. The interconnected, synergy, interwoven, almost invasive is feeling a little bit like the shadow side of those words. So my hope with our conversation is that from these three really spectacular artists and teaching artists, we can get some inspiration and some practical tips for how to navigate this sort of dual life of being both an artist and a teaching artist at the same time. So hopefully these words will come back to you and you'll add some new words to them as we progress tonight. So I'm going to start with a question for all of our panelists, which is, can you tell us how you became a teaching artist? What was your path to teaching artistry? And I think you can just come off mute if you are up for speaking, panelists, and then we'll cycle through everybody.
I'm happy to get it started. Good evening, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this conversation and an honor because I see myself as still a young teaching artist. I was teaching here and there prior to 2021, but 2021 is really when I started to call myself a teaching artist. And that was through taking a training with the Teaching Artist Project, which I recommend to anybody who wants to deepen their teaching practice. And it was through this course that I really deepened my purpose as an artist and as a teacher. And also that I started growing a network. And I think I remember the course being about 3 months or 2 months. And it immediately led to my first employment as a teaching artist, which was with a company called Girl Be Heard. My bad. Girl Be Heard. They work with young girls from 12 to 18 throughout a whole year. Which is really special because you get to really grow a relationship with the students and to really accompany them in their project. But yeah, maybe I'll pass it on to somebody else.
May I?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I got involved sort of accidentally. I was a member of a dance company. And we were hired by the National Endowment to be artists in the schools. And so we were on the road for 20 weeks a year. And many of those weeks were spent in schools teaching. And we we entered that situation without any training whatsoever. When I stopped dancing, which was after about 10 years of touring, I turned into a visual artist. And Lincoln Center had a brand new program called Lincoln Center Institute. And I was asked if I would be interested in joining the roster of teaching artists. And yeah, and I did. And I've been there ever since. So that's really when teaching artist as a term was sort of christened. Goes way back to the mid 70s, honestly. And I joined in 1980. So I was there at a very early time, and I've been there ever since.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being on this call. I think for me, the inspiration of or when I started teaching was more as a performer, you know, touring, and then I think the joy of you know, when you are in certain countries or cities, and then the theater has outreach programs, and then the performance basically like you're doing like excerpts or in schools or like different workshops. That is where initially started, and then the main the huge thing that came to me that actually hit me is when I was doing my master's at Trinity Laban, where they had a program called CAT, which is the Center for Advanced Training, which was young teenagers coming in and basically didn't know their left from their right, but like just experiencing arts. And then within couple weeks, months, all of a sudden it's like these kids, us teaching them, they just love it. They find their voices, and that is really where it just brought everything full circle. And I realized like how much I really enjoy seeing young people or like people who don't necessarily have arts background or whatever. Because when I was growing up, even though I had a lot of arts in my life, it wasn't really formal. It wasn't formal until at a very at an older age. And so that is where it really started clicking for me, like, oh, okay, the joy that it really brings to these kids and where they really start forming their own voices, that was where it really started clicking for me. And so when I came back to the US and then working with Battery Dance Company, traveling around the world, working as a cultural ambassador, that was really where it kind of cemented. So yeah.
I think that's a great jumping off point for my next question. I hear you say something, Clement, that you found something in helping other people to sort of access their own voices. And so my question for all three of you is, in what ways does teaching artistry fuel your artistic practice, and in what ways can it be detrimental? I think that's probably the biggest question of the day.
I think for me, where that is one thing that like that experience for me still stays with me today. Every time I go into classroom, the joy of seeing like, and I have one particular story of this kid literally came in, literally didn't know his left from his right. And then 6 months in, you're like, oh my God, this is like the young, the best dancer, you name it, in the making. But I guess the best or the most surprising thing that happened at the end of the year, after a full year of training, you're like, okay, that's it. This is like, this kid is just completely knocking it out of the field. And then he came at the end and he's like, he's going to quit dancing. And everybody was perplexed. Like, why? Why are you not continuing? You were so good. You came in, you didn't know, and now you're the best. And he was like, well, I'm gonna go to the pilot academy. And that's where it clicked in for me. It was like the dance being or movement being a tool for him to finally develop his voice, and him finally finding the confidence to know what he wants to do. And that was for me, I still get chills whenever I tell the story or when I think about it. And for me, that really cemented, and that brings me so much joy to be able to go into classrooms every single time, because for me, I'm not like a big public speaker, but through dance, I can stand in front of people. So that is really my thing.
If I can add to this, this feeling of supporting people's growth, I think that when I truly took teaching artists, the work of the teaching artist seriously, it was at a time as in my artistic practice, I was feeling a lot of frustration and um, spending what felt at the time like too much time on my own little artist problems, whether that was promoting my musical or show or how I was going to finance the next project. And it felt, especially coming out of the pandemic, when we were so isolated and so aware of so many people's suffering, it felt like not the best use of my time and energy. And so every time I enter the classroom, is very much a time of grounding for me, because I'm really um, creating music, practicing my instrument used to be my moments of presence, of full presence. And over time, as it became my profession, I have to confess that there are many times where I'm not fully present, even though I'm engaging with music and I'm trying to be creative. But when I'm with the students, and especially when in 2021 when I entered this career, I was back in that state of full presence. So it's now like a crucial ingredient to my creative practice, because it reminds me of the why, continuously reminds me of why I do it.
I think that I would like to speak to the difficulty and the problems of balancing your artistic career and the demands upon you as a teaching artist. I think time. There were times when it was not in balance for me, where the draw on my teaching was much greater than the draw on my artistic work, meaning that I had much more recognition and appreciation and praise for my teaching work than I did for what I made as an artist, as a painter. And that was a very difficult place to be, because having come from the performing arts, I loved the applause and the praise. I loved that. And I loved being told that I was wildly imaginative and incredibly creative, and people saw things in works of art that they had never expected to find there, and all of the satisfaction that happens when you're helping people engage in your art form. And I found it very enticing and very intoxicating, I'm going to say. So for me to be able to carve out a schedule that really balanced my art making with my teaching artistry was a real challenge, and that took quite a while. Um, it took a while before I felt I could say no to certain jobs, and to really focus those days where I was not going to be teaching on being in my studio. Now I have a very quick switch that I can just turn on when I walk in my studio door. I know I'm there to be a painter. And when I walk into a room with 40 participants, I know now I'm a teaching artist. And so I can flip that switch pretty quickly now, but it took a long time for me to be able to do that. So I think one of the downfalls was that I felt it was invasive, as someone put up on the word cloud. And I also felt that it was a complicated balance. And I think that my big tips that I would like to share are that I work for multiple organizations. I work for three major institutions: Lincoln Center, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum. And between those three, oh, and the Department of Education. And so in between those four sort of employers, I carve out time for all of them and keep my balls juggling in the air. And I also preserve my time. I take the jobs that pay me the most and that are the most reliable in terms of getting me paid on time. Um, so I don't have to chase down the money after I've delivered the job. So those are just some of the things that I have done to try to make it a smooth transition between my art making and my teaching, which I'm devoted to. I think anybody who's ever been and done work with me knows that I am devoted to the teaching. I really, really am. I find it very enriching. It's completely sparked and ignited my creativity every day that I'm involved in it. I'm making something up from scratch. So it's a very important aspect of what I do, but the balancing act between those two things is really, really critical.
I think a lot of people in the chat and myself are empathizing and wishing we had your ability to make that switch when you walk into your studio more easily. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about any practices or thoughts or mantras you have about when you step in to create art as an artist and not as a teaching artist? Any further wisdom you could share with the room?
I keep a paper calendar. And when times are really difficult in terms of my teaching schedule, I write in my calendar when I'm going to be in the studio. In the same way that I write in my calendar when I'm going to be at the Whitney or when I'm going to be at MoMA or when I'm going to do something with the DOE. I carved out the time and I decide that that's really mine. I don't have any other magic things, though it's become easier over many years of practice. And also, if you are really, I mean, I have watched a lot of people give up their art form when they became very involved in teaching artistry, which kind of kills me. I have to say it's got to be a lot easier in the visual arts than it is in the performing arts. And I would acknowledge that because as a dancer, I didn't start until everybody else showed up. You know, rehearsal didn't begin until the whole company was assembled. In my studio, the only person who I'm counting on is myself. And so that transition into getting started is much faster, much faster. But experience helps.
Hopefully we will all get there someday. Clement and Natie, I want to open it up to you. I see you both came off mute. Take it.
I think for me, specifically what Barbara is saying, like, it is hard as a performing artist to, especially if you're making, like, let's say, consistent income, and I mean, you need to still balance New York City and living here and being able to, like, do your artistry. And but one thing that I personally always like, performing is the reason why I am teaching, right? And even I work with Dream Yard. There's also an organization in the Bronx. They serve mainly the Bronx, and one of the goal is really like they support you as a teaching artist in your artistry, so that you can show up in the classroom. Because without you thriving as an artist, you cannot thrive in front of the kids. So it's like this ongoing cycle, and this is something, a mantra that I've also found for myself. Like, I keep performing, and of course, it's sometimes scheduling wise, it's very hard, and on top of it, even having family and all of those things. But those are one thing that I personally have come to find is like once I don't know. We have the 24 hours in a day, and yet I'm like, I still always seem to find time to do what I want to do. And it is home purely because I want it's this switch, and I'm not doing it because I have to do, but I do it because I choose to do. And showing up at and once I keep the communication lines clear with companies that I'm working with in terms of like touring or in terms of like performing and all of those things, then they are also able to give me the feedback like, okay, the rehearsal, these are the rehearsal times, and people are able to adapt and all of those things. And the flexibility really helps. But I keep strong, definitely make sure that I still keep performing and rehearsing and besides the teaching artist.
Like both Barbara and Clement said it, like balance is key, and it's a privilege when we get to a position where we can pass certain residencies because we know that it's going to impede on our creation time. So I do want to acknowledge that there are seasons in life where we might not be able to prioritize that.
Yeah.
But when we can, and I think what I'm about to say is very personal to each and every one, but I think it's easy, especially in a city like New York, when we're rushing from one thing to another. It's easy to forget about the kind of energetical reset that we need in order to, okay, now I'm entering my artistic creative time. So for me, um, that reset of my energy in my body, it often happens like in a bath or some movement practice. But I need this kind of like physical cleansing to let go of whatever happened during my teaching time or even my work as a curator and all of those potential frustrations or just organizational skills that I've had to exert. Let that go, reset, and now, okay, step into my artistic practice. So whatever that means for you, it may not be a bath or a yoga practice, but find that ritual that kind of allows you to reset.
I love that, Natie. And I love hearing the different approaches to sort of the practical side of managing your energy artistically, setting aside the time in your calendar, using a paper calendar, choosing a specific day that you just devote to your creation, and then finding a way to energetically reset. I think those are all really beautiful. And I need to work on my own energetic resets. Um, I know there's a lot of questions that are applicable to all three of you, but I've got a couple that I think are specific to each of you and to what you all bring specifically to this panel. Barbara, I'm going to start with you. And I know you talked about folks who have left the profession or left practicing their artistry.
Yes.
And I'm curious, you stayed working as a teaching artist and an artist for many years and through many changes, both I'm sure in your own life, but in our cultural life and in the life of funding and the life of how we see art. What insight do you have into how we can emulate that in our own careers?
How we can emulate what exactly?
You're still doing it. You're still here. You're a leading
Oh,
voice.
yeah. Okay. Oh, that.
That, yes.
Well, I think that one of the things that I did strategically was that I did not give myself over to any one organization. Um, I wanted to maintain my life as a teaching artist, but I began to see how funding shifts from one organization to another, and that certain trends in the world of education affected like work in schools, for instance. Well, if all the work that you were doing was in schools, and schools were in trouble and they weren't having arts activities, then that was, where was your work going to be? So the idea of working in a museum where I'm helping audiences interact with works of art on site. I just go to the museum, they come to me, and I'm helping them interact with the works on the wall through simple activities, through conversation, through a number of different things. That was something that was ongoing even when schoolwork seemed to be drying up. So the idea of diversification, I'm going to use that word, as an educator, that's a tip. That has really helped me, because the ebb and flow of trends, when a school district, and I'm speaking of New York City schools right now, when they get a new curriculum, as they have just done in several places that I've been working, and there's a new focus to the curriculum, and they want to include works of art in it, and then suddenly you're researching a whole lot of other ideas. Well, if you're doing that in one location, and you know that other schools are working with that same kind of curriculum, then you might have an idea that you could sell someplace else. So it's like keeping your eyes and ears open about what's going on in the field, I think, is very important. What's going on in terms of funding, what's going on in terms of the world of education. And then, of course, what's going on in the art world, is public works. That was a huge thing in my life when public works suddenly became available to me, meaning that I'd had enough exhibition experience and enough of a reputation that I would be shortlisted for public projects, and then I was awarded them. That meant that I was not teaching for a semester, but I had been teaching long enough that I knew when I was done with the public work, I could say to one of my institutions, okay, I'm ready for the next semester's worth of work and I want to be back on the roster, kind of thing. So a lot of it, the longevity issue, and trying to keep that balance, diversification, that's what really worked for me. Because everything's changing all around you all the time. And you can't foresee how it's going to shift. But about people leaving their artistry, I'm not against someone who decides to give up their dancing career and become a full-time teaching artist in their art form of dance. I'm not against that. But the advantage for some organizations, for instance, Lincoln Center, hired people because they were active in their careers in dance, theater, music, and in the visual arts. That's what they wanted on the roster, and people that were then interested in teaching. So they made their reputation based on the fact that we were all working artists. And that was something that was a real requirement for many years. It's not as much a requirement now as it once was, because we know that dancers, dance is a short-lived experience for many people. If you're a choreographer, your career can extend beyond your dancing years. But I think that the performing arts have it tough. They really do. They really do, keeping their careers going. Because of the logistics issues. If you're going to be on the road for the fall semester, can you be in schools in the spring term? I mean, can you organize it that way? If you're rehearsing Monday, Wednesday, Friday every week, because that's what the choreographer is demanding of you, then I guess you're only available to teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays. How do you do all that? And I do think that the field requires a certain amount of activism from teaching artists to be able to say to the institutions that they are working for that you make it difficult to maintain my artistry unless you give me a schedule several months in advance. I'm not available in the next 2 weeks. I'm already booked during that time. You have to really think of booking me longer ahead. Because my calendar fills and I can't do it for you. So I think that we have to speak up about what our needs are, and see if we can't affect change in the field.
Thank you, Barbara. That is a great answer, and there's so much to unpack in there. Clement, I know you are a parent, and I know that adds a level of complexity. So, how do you balance that added element of your life with your work as a performer, as a dancer, as a teaching artist, as a person who has his own arts organization? That's a lot of hats.
That's true. It is. And one of the thing, and I think what Barbara kind of already alluded to is the diversity, but the diversity, and for me, it becomes like I kind of see like, okay, different streams of income, right? And the difference, that is the same thing as the diversity, because especially as an artist, our work is not the whole year round. Even if you look at the teaching artist industry, it's like I always say, like in the teaching art, like it's like 9 months out of the year, September through May, June, and the whole summer. It's kind of like you're daydreaming if you're just depending on that. So how can you diversify, or how can you have a different stream of income so that it juxtaposes constantly? And then I kind of really set a priority, right? Like right now, as a father, one of my main goal is and I've also before that, like you're working, so of course you build a certain credibility, and credibility for me lies in the accountability of showing up every time, right? Like how people building the environment where people know that they can count on you. When you say that you're going to show up, that you show up, that you don't come up with excuses like, oh, this happened. And, like, so once that you build that credibility, it gives you a lot of privilege to be able to kind of almost choose your schedule and organize your schedule in a way, because you can say yes and no without people feeling like you are never available anymore, right? If you say that you're available, you do show up and you are there. If you're not, doesn't mean that you're gone forever. Then they will get back to you again when another opportunity arises. And so this is one of the main thing. And as the father, right now, I push most of my teaching part in the morning, like between school time, so that the after school, before I used to do a lot of after school, but now I do less after school. And I also have teaching artists that also work for me with the drumming and different, because I obviously cannot be at every school. And so one of the main thing is like, okay, what is my priority for the day? And one of the things that I really focused on is like, okay, I cannot have priorities. I can only have a priority, right? Because you can't have many first things. And at this very moment in my life, my kids are really my priority in a sense. So, but in order to have that priority, what supports that? And so, like a lot of the admin stuff for my organization for TIKoRO, it's like literally after the kids go to bed. That's when I'm really like, I'm the last person to go to bed and the first person that wakes up. And so, and I know it's just a season for that. This is like, I'm kind of thinking like, and every year now I'm like, okay, maybe I can hire a little bit more help and this and that. So this is where I kind of go about a little bit. This year I have somebody who supports me a little bit in the admin and kind of trying to do the marketing aspect. But even prior to that, in order to be able to delegate, I needed to do it to be able to know what to delegate. And so this year, I'm doing a little bit more that I'm kind of already thinking about like, okay, maybe next year, if things go well and it keeps growing, I can delegate that too, right? But prior to that, it's really, you have to go through it. And the sleepless nights, I mean, I know I'm very lucky. I don't need much sleep. Like, so I bank on that too, right? And I know also when I can take my rest. So I'm very strict with my schedule and those things. So the accountability aspect of like people And so because of that, for example, I don't give my kids when I get into the classroom, I don't give them a break because I'm like, you know, we have accountability to each other. You showed up and I showed up. I cannot be like, oh, just because you're tired, I'm not gonna, oh, let's just sit around. That doesn't work. You came here because you were expecting me to teach you dance. And so if I now don't teach you dance, what do you think? Next time you're not gonna show up anymore. So, through those part joking, but part also very serious. And that accountability really is something that I take very seriously in order to kind of manage my schedule.
That's great. That's a really great way to think about it, is accountability and building that credibility in one priority. That makes it very clear. Natie, I want to turn the focus to you now. And I saw a parallel just when we were talking before about all of the sort of teaching artists and artists' ability to move between making art and teaching and being here and being there and doing our admin and promoting our work, and sort of the experience of moving between cultures. And I'm curious how your experience of moving between cultures and between countries feeds into your work as a teaching artist and as an artist.
It's something that I cannot not be, and something that I cannot not think about, because turns out, seems like this space makes people very curious. And then when I open my mouth and I sound the way that I do, it raises more questions. So I don't, I, it, yeah, it's intertwined in my experience of life. And so I started answering or connecting, my connections to different cultures, from a French island. But I'm born, my mother is Spanish, and then I studied in Australia, and now I've been here over a decade. And so that all those influences first started to express themselves in my music. But as I really defined my why, and truly that happened through my teaching artist work, I discovered that a lot of my creativity and artistic purpose is around creating spaces for connection and spaces for education in a way, or in intergenerational teaching. And so now this is the third year of me curating this festival, Creole Fest, that you mentioned in the beginning. And I think that this path as a curator is it's for me, it's an obvious like other branch that came through my teaching artist work. I realized entering the field that being a teaching artist doesn't just mean teaching the students in the classroom. I think Barbara mentioned this notion of activism earlier when she was referring about just advocating for our needs as artists. And to add to that, I think that there's also a mission that we all stand for and values that we all stand for, and they can exist and they can thrive in our connection to the students, but also in our connections to our co-teachers and within our organization, with the methods of communication that we choose and of leadership. So I think that all these influences that I'm made of, they're a blessing, and they enrich the way I can approach whether it's the students or the more administrative sides of things. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a great answer. I know we want to save some time for questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Kinsey, who has been collecting questions.
Yes. Thank you all so much. I don't have any current questions in the chat, although there has been a lot. I hope that you've been reading. There's been a lot of affirmation and folks like really connecting to what our panelists have shared. So if you are listening, now is your time to shine. If you would like to ask a question to our panelists, you can share it in the chat, but also we welcome you to raise a hand, come off mute if you feel comfortable. The floor is open. Okay. I have a question in the chat from Renee that asks, did you feel any pushback from a family or friends about becoming a teaching artist in regards to sources of income or a career versus your passions?
I'll jump in. I had the opposite reaction. My parents were thrilled that I was teaching. They both taught in different environments, so they really value this work. But I think ultimately, if they had disagreed, that at the end of the day, it is, and now this work is supporting my artistic practice. Having consistent income is giving me peace so that I can create. So whether or not other people have opinions about it and understand what that brings to my artist self, that doesn't really concern me, So I would say if it makes sense for you now and it supports your artistic practice, then that's what matters.
Yeah, I think for me it's also no pushback, and I think I've been very fortunate in my environment and in my family. In many ways, I'm a bit of like the first. So it's me kind of feeding them information about what I'm doing and how I'm doing, and I feel very encouraged by them. So yeah.
I realize now I did miss Carolyn's question from a little bit earlier in the chat. And Carolyn, I may need a little bit more context if you're referring to something specific or one of our.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Hi.
go ahead. Hi.
I right now I'm teaching in the classroom, and even during this session, I've been answering emails. I have to confess. How do you make that delineation? So, oh, you're selfish, you're dismissive, you're disrespectful. It's like, no, I have other things to do. I'm an adjunct, so this is a part. I shouldn't even speak about this. We're being recorded. But the point is, how do you make that delineation and keep those boundaries? Okay. Because there's always someone else's emergency that can intrude on your personal time. Barbara was talking about when she goes into the studio and whatnot. And it's just very hard because you want to be helpful. So, I'm not exactly a teaching artist at this moment, but I am teaching music. So it's still making that delineation between what you're doing in one sphere versus your own personal time. So if someone can speak to that, that would be helpful.
That's a great question, Carolyn. How do we make people feel welcome and heard while still respecting our own boundaries and our own needs and sort of the parameters of our own contracts? And I don't have an answer for that because I am bad at it.
I guess I'm also an adjunct professor, and I think it's more about, at least for me, what works is really clarity, and I don't use the word broadly into like just be clear, because sometimes you think you're being clear, but most of the time you're just not being clear of what you need or what you need to do. Meaning like you need to and you kind of said it a little bit in your question, like other people's emergency. and it should stay their emergency, not your emergency. And that is not to be mean, but that is more to be clear about what is not your emergency, so that you don't start jumping the gun in a sense, right? And get to it when you can, because that gives you the clarity, and as you can explain everything to anybody, they won't understand it because they are not you, right? They just need whatever they need. However, what do you need? And you need to be clear about that. That's what I mean with clarity. You need to be clear about what you need and what works for you. And so then if it's, let's say, you know what, today is holiday, I am not answering any emails about, then you shouldn't, in a sense. And I feel like sometimes it feels like, well, but then my job and all of those things, it is true, but the you have to just allot yourself a certain time for it and stick within that. And if you can't get to it, just say like, I'll get to it when you get to it. And when people cannot find you, they'll find somebody else to solve it, and so on. At least I think. Otherwise, you just get overwhelmed with other people's things, and now you'll just keep burying yours.
I want to agree with that, because I will agree with that, because I find I need to practice, and it just intrudes on my practice time, period. It's like, oh, I didn't get this done. I have to, get this done by tomorrow morning, et cetera, et cetera. And finding that balance, rebalancing right now is one of my goals.
I know I'm not a panelist, but I do want to offer something that's worked for me, just mentally. And this came out of the pandemic for me too, was deciding to value all of my work, whether it was like paid work or not paid work, as the same like mental value to myself. Like there is a wage that I get for doing my own artistic work, even if it's not like hitting my bank account. Like it is still work, it is still valuable, it is still somehow contributing to the overall picture. And it's like just entirely like a mental thing, is that like all my work is valuable and it's all work. That is all.
Yes, Leah. I second that. I know we only have a few minutes left, but there are a couple more questions. So one is, how can we educate employers better about our rights, the feeling of becoming disposable, and inconsistent pay rates? That is a great question. And although I am not a panelist, I would also like to start with sharing that the Roundtable had just recently completed some research related to this question that has been posted on our website. So I'm going to place it in the chat. I highly recommend, if you haven't already, read this report. It's called Paying for Professionalism. It's a report regarding teaching artists compensation practices in New York City and pondering how we can move forward, what sort of action steps each kind of constituent group in our arts ecosystem can take to create more sustainability and like longevity in the field. So there is a table at the back of that has some recommended actions. I also recommend, if you feel comfortable doing so, share this research with your employer. And we're going to have an event on it coming up soon. So come to that and invite your employers to that as well. And now I'll turn that over to everyone else on the call.
Anyone have any insight into how to advocate to employers?
Well, first of all, you have to make yourself invaluable. You've got to be so good in your work as a teaching artist that they would really be sorry to see you go. So excellence, that's the first thing. You need to be excellent at this work. And then you need to gather with other teaching artists that within the organization. I was part of a union organizing committee at Lincoln Center many, many years ago. We still have a union that protects our salaries, And it was exactly for that reason that we saw disparity, that some people were getting paid at a rate that was different than what seemed like for the same type of job. So we got rid of all that just by organizing, but also by being overachievers, excellent at our work, and we knew that they didn't want to get along without us. So you have to you want to be in touch with your other artists within the organization. TAs band together.
There is, I 100% second that, Barbara. There's this book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And that's exactly what basically talks about. Like by Carl Newport. Like, if you haven't read it, read it, because I think that's the only way you can stay true to you and stay close to you, so that things will come to you because of your artistry and because of what you have to offer, and not go chase things for whatever reason. Yeah. So good they can't ignore you.
I know we have to close out, Kinsey. I've been taking notes throughout, and I kind of wanted to offer back a word cloud of what I think resonated with everyone. So here were the words that I heard coming up from our panelists and also in the chat. Define my why, diversify, prioritize, accountability, activism, and clarity. So that's what that panel was about from my perspective.
I will have that. Thank you for taking notes and summing that up on the fly. That was amazing. And yes, unfortunately, we do have to close out now. I feel like this flew by, but I feel like there were also, as Leah just read off, like so many gems and takeaways. So I just want to give a huge thank you to all of our panelists for joining and for sharing your experiences and expertise, and Leah for moderating and putting together this beautiful conversation. So grateful to continue working and sharing space with you all. I hope that you can join us again for the last installment of TA Tuesdays next week, same time, same Zoom link. Next week, we will be with folks from the Brooklyn Arts Council, and we're going to be investigating things like social safety nets and other benefit systems that teaching artists may not know about that might be of interest or accessible to them in New York City and New York State. So come for that. If you haven't signed up for it, the link is in the chat. Also, just a reminder that when you exit this Zoom room, your internet browser may open with 2 questions in a survey. That is from the roundtable. We are in the middle of our strategic plan and would love to have more teaching artists' voice incorporated in all the materials that we're using to put that plan together. So if you have a couple of minutes, please answer those 2 questions if they pop up in your browser. We would be so grateful to have your responses. And otherwise, thank you all so much. Hope to see you next week. And everyone, take care. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.